I learned a great deal with my family, too. People used to say to me, "What was it like to grow up in a deaf family?" And I used to say, "Well, I guess it was like being in a family. It's got a mother and a father and sisters, and we sit at a dining table and eat, and we live in a house, and dad goes to work, and the kids go to school, and we've got a cat. Is that different than other families?" I couldn't understand how it might be until I began to meet deaf people who had hearing parents, and then I began to see a difference. But basically, there were virtually no communication problems between my parents and myself until I hit, of course, that sassy, smart alecky age in my early teens. That was no language problem. Now, the school used some signs which we didn't use at home, and vice versa. So I had to always remember where I was, which signs to use. When I forgot that, my mom would sometimes correct me and say, "Where'd you get that sign?" Shucks, that's right, that should be signed at school. But, basically, little bitty signs like that, that's kind of a typical generational difference. Another experience I had was if I brought signs we used at home with deaf adults to the school. Um, but most of the time, I was able to separate out the signs that we used at home from the signs we used at school, those few that were different. Went to lots of parties with my parents, to the club. My dad and I used to love to go fishing. We'd get up about 4 o'clock on Sunday morning and drive out to the river. It was called the Old River. It was a pretty good distance from home, so we'd get up wee early and drive about 2 hours, get there at 6 o'clock or so in the morning. And out on the river was a large raft. A boat would take us out and leave us at the raft, and we would fish. And then when we were finished, we'd run a flag up, and they would know to come back out and pick us up again. And there was an outhouse on the raft and little squares cut in the floor of the raft so we could fish in those little squares. It was a great place to go. I loved it. Now, it never failed. Every time we went, my dad would say to me, "Be careful, don't lean too far over the raft. Remember the time your sister Jo fell off and almost drowned?" And I'd say, "Yeah, Dad, I know." And the next time we'd go, he'd say, "Now, don't forget, you don't want to lean over and fall over." I heard that story so many times. My dad recently told me that they've done away with the raft. And that really broke my heart because it was a wonderful place to go, and I was very fond of it in my memories. Another thing my dad and I did all the time was go to Louisiana State University football games. The stadium was real close by, within walking distance. My mom and I, rather than going out and doing activities, would tend to sit and chat for great lengths of time. My mom worked in the bindery. After school, I'd drop in on her at work, and she'd never hesitate. She'd put her work on hold, and we'd have a nice long chat. I have two sisters. The oldest is Jo, the second, Pauline, and I'm the youngest of the family. We all communicate with each other and really give each other a lot of love and support. Growing up, they always used to call me the baby of the family, and I took great offense at that. But as an adult, I find that very endearing. Jo would play with signs and was very humorous, told jokes, and told me all kinds of stories. Phyllis, on the other hand, was more quiet type of person, but we're very similar to one another. She's sensitive and cries easily, as I do. She went to Gallaudet and came back and said, "Hey, MJ, I have to tell you, don't be a crybaby when you go to Gallaudet because the kids won't have anything to do with you." So I got myself all prepared to be real hardened and tough before I went to Gallaudet. Without an older sister like that, I never would have known how to be prepared for that kind of thing. I have so much to thank my family for, giving me my language and my culture, and most of all, giving me an undaunting sense of capability. The word can't was not within our family vocabulary. I never realized how valuable that was till I visited a family where there was a deaf child with hearing family members. And when they were all sitting around and laughing, I said to my deaf friend, "What did they say?" And when my deaf friend asked the parents, the response was, "Oh, it doesn't matter." It really hit me, and I began to realize, wow, a lack of communication like that can be really significant. I don't know how in the world my friends tolerated it. To me, that was an abnormal family setting. Another group of people that I'm particularly grateful to is the deaf community in Baton Rouge and New Orleans. We used to go to the deaf clubs there, and they were wonderful friends, mentors. They would sit me down and say, "Now, when you get older, don't forget to do this and that. MJ, what do you want to do when you grow up?" And I would say, "Well, I want to do this." And they'd say, "Good, now you can do this. This is what you need to do." And they would give me advice and direction and encouragement along the way. They would warn me as to which behaviors were acceptable and which were rude. It was like having a whole room full of foster parents, as it were. There are three people that I'm particularly fond of from the School for the Deaf. Max Ray was the first one of those. He was my high school math teacher. He was deaf, graduated from Gallaudet back in 55, 57, something like that, and used American Sign Language fluently. Now, they were supposed to be fingerspelling everything, but when he closed the classroom door, he dropped the rules and just did what communicated. And of course, at that time, I despised math. And he was always saying, "You can do it, MJ, you can do it." One thing that made him particularly special to me was a day when we had visitors in the classroom. You know how visitors are always coming to the School for the Deaf and watching us, quote, perform. Well, this happened one day, and of course, with the visitors there, he had to use the visible English system of communication. He wrote a hard problem on the board and said, "MJ, I want you to do this." Well, I nearly died. I got up there and took a stab at it. And he looked at me and he fingerspelled very good, MJ, and I sat down with a great sense of relief. And I thought, oh, great, I don't look stupid or dumb in front of these visitors. Well, the minute the visitors walked out the door, he shut the door and he said, "What's wrong with you, MJ? That was wrong. Oh, goodness, let me show you how to work this math problem." He knew what it would feel like to make a fool of yourself in front of all those visitors. And he helped me save face by uh, saying that I had done it correctly when the visitors were in the classroom. A second person was Joanne Bowles, a hearing woman who taught typing and business classes. I think I took classes for her for 4 or 5 years. I rarely ever actually sat at the typewriter. Generally, I sat and asked her all kinds of questions about hearing people. She was wonderful because she had a hearing husband and hearing children and no deafness in her family. She began to tell me all about the hearing world. I mean, I'd grown up with hearing neighbors and I had actually played with some of the children in my neighborhood, but I didn't know what they were really like and how they really communicated and the things they said. And here was a hearing teacher who was willing to help me understand all about her world. Now, it was a typing class, and she'd make me sit down for the first 15 minutes of class and get my typing lesson done. But the most marvelous thing were the conversations that we had. She told me one time, "I know, MJ, that when you leave high school, you'll never touch a typewriter again." So just in case she sees this videotape, I have to say I have 3 computers in my office and my home, and I'm at that keyboard all the time. That ought to make her happy. Another person that I remember fondly was F.L. Baker. I studied under him for only 1 year, but I think I must have learned 90% of my education from him. He was fluent in French, Latin, American Sign Language, and English. But what he really taught me was what the meaning of challenge was and what it meant to make a mistake and accept that mistake. You know, growing up, things had come pretty easy for me. Never really had to work too hard for things. But when he got me in his class, he decided to really challenge me. He'd write a sentence on the board in English and say, correct this, find what was wrong with it. One time he came in and he said, MJ, you'll never get this right. Well, I was very proud of my perfect record, and I wasn't about to let the day be the end of that. So I accepted his challenge, and he wrote something on the board like Mrs. Blair will come here tonight, something I don't remember exactly. But anyway, I looked at it, and it had the period after Mrs. and had the period at the end, and it had the dot on the top of the I in will, and it looked perfect to me. And I said, it's fine. He looked at me and said, see? And I said, wait a minute. And I looked again, and I looked again. I couldn't find a thing. Well, sure enough, the name of the woman that he'd written on the board was a French name, and it needed to have an accent mark in that name. And he looked at me and he said, see, you're still alive. You're not dead. You can make a mistake and it's okay. And that was a lesson that really served me well. It also taught me a great deal about humility. Mr. Baker has passed away, and in many ways, I'm very sad that he can't see today where I am and what I've done.